Good evening, actually good morning, Sunday. This is Sunday school for March, I don't know the date tomorrow. Sunday school from Northern Hills Bible Chapel for March, I can look it up. Let's see. March 21st, Sunday school for March 21st from Northern Hills Bible Chapel. Greetings in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm talking the last few sessions about the 7 days of creation as being God drawing 7 pictures from the 7 ages, the 7 dispensations. Essentially, that God gave us a set of bookmarks that we could put through our Bible to describe how he was going to deal with mankind from beginning to end. We already have day 1, day 4, and day 7. And today's lesson is going to be on day 2. The reason we went to day 1, light, and day 4 and day 7 was the reason we used those 3 days. Because they're kind of like bookmarks. They're pretty easy to understand and pretty clear. And so by using them first, we can kind of make it easier to divide up the other ones. So day 1 was the light and darkness. In the first day, God created light and he created darkness, and he separated the light from the dark. And then we saw that was a picture of Adam and Eve in the garden when they had a choice between the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they had to choose. They had to choose between light and dark, and they chose, of course, to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and sinned. We skipped down to day 4, leaving days 2 and 3 in the middle. We skipped down to day 4, and that's when God created the sun, the moon, and the stars. And we saw that the sun, this pictures the age of the church, the sun being Jesus Christ. Malachi, the sun of righteousness will rise with healing in its wings. Jesus is the sun. He's the bright morning star. He's the light. I am the light of the world, he says twice. In the light, life was the light of men, John chapter 1. The church, like the moon, reflects the glory of Jesus Christ. And then we, like individual believers, reflect, we're like stars in the dark universe, dark sky. Our righteousness in the age of depravity, our following of Jesus, our doing his will, are like bright lights in the heavens, as Paul says into the Philippians. Then we skip to day 7. The 7th day, God rested from his work of creating. And we flip down to Revelation chapter 21, where God brings the new Jerusalem, descends from heaven to be with men. And there's no more crying or mourning or pain, no more sin. God rests. The eternal rest of God, no longer having to do the work of salvation, no longer working, and man resting. There's peace and there's light from God and from the Lamb. There's no more temple because God dwells with man, and there's just the tree of life is there, restored, and there's just a big sigh of finally, after all the struggle we've gone through in the scriptures, all the things we've seen, all the pain, the suffering, the sin, the consequences of it, is finally God has restored everything. Day 7, rest. So we had day 1, the age of innocence, day 4, the age of grace, and day 7, the age of eternal rest or rest. So we want to look at day 2 today. Again, it was day 2, the end of day 2, that really settled in my mind that this was what God was doing, because I'll look over in a second. But if there's a house of rules, if there's an oikonomos, the house and rules, if God's dealing with mankind differently in these ages, if it's not just me thinking, oh, this picture kind of fits, if God's really doing this, then he needs to tell us exactly when the rules change. When does the rules change between Adam's fall and the church? When does that day 2 become day 3? We don't have that. We don't have any. This is just a construct of men. Hey, look, 7 pictures. I think it fits the ages. But if these things fit, then there should be a very clear definition in the scripture of when the 2nd day ends and the 3rd day begins. So, what is the? Let's first of all read Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 through 8. On the 2nd day of creation, that's what God created. So Genesis 1, verses 6 through 8. And God said, let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water. So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. And it was so. And God called the expanse sky, and there was evening, and there was morning the 2nd day. Now, couple of things. This word expanse is translated firmament or substance, or different ways in different translations. It's a fixed, it sounds like a fixed object, but we'll read down in same chapter. We skip down to verse 15 when he talks about creating the sun, the moon, and the stars. It says, let them be lights in the expanse of the sky. And the word sky is not there, it's just in the expanse. And God set them, verse 17, in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth. So the stars, sun, moon, and stars are in the expanse. That tells us a little bit more about what it is that's separating the waters. And then in verse, on the fifth day of creation, when God creates the sea creatures and the birds, he tells us that the birds, verse 20, let the water teem with living creatures and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky. So it sounds to me that the expanse is all of the presence of the stars, the sun, the moon. It's everything that's eternally or infinity separating us from God, separating the waters beneath from the waters above. I know that's a little different than we talk about in creation science, that possibly the waters were above were the vapor canopy, but just the text itself sounds to me like the stars, the sun, the moon, and the stars are in this expanse that's God created that separates the waters. And so what is this picture? This picture God's creating here is of a great separation between the things above the expanse and the things below the expanse. And in this age from, well, when does this age begin? Day 2. Day 1 is the perfect innocence of Adam and Eve in the garden. And so they obviously fall in chapter 3 of Genesis, verse 6. Chapter 3 of Genesis, verse 6. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. And then verse 7, then the eyes of both of them were opened. They realized they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. The story goes on showing us the conscience had been born in man and woman. They now realized that they were naked. They now realized that they had sinned. They now hid from God. The conscience of man pushes God away, realizes the sin and the wrong of what's being done, and separates man from God. And this whole age, this age of conscience, God is separate from man. He's eternally above. And there's a distance between God and man that can never be broached by man. What defines this age? We'll have to talk in a few minutes about what ends it. But the chapter 4, verse 26, at that time, men began to call on the name of the Lord. So in this period of time, this age, this second age, this age of separation of so far and so infinite, the stars, beyond the stars of God, and that this expanse that separates man can't reach beyond it. They'll call on the name of the Lord. Also Abraham in chapter 13, verse 4. And he went out, he built an altar, and there Abraham called on the name of the Lord. And this age is characterized by men trying to reach God by calling on him. What are some of the other things? We'll see the sacrifices, the smoke of men's sacrifices will ascend to God. They're trying to reach God who's separated. And so Abel offers a sacrifice, Noah, Abraham at least 3 times, east of Bethel, Mamre, Mount Moriah. He sacrifices, Isaac sacrifices at Beersheba, Jacob at Bethel, Job sacrifices. That all these men, these patriarchs who lived in this period of time, are their smoke of their offerings ascends to God. We read in Deuteronomy 12:8 that during this time, everyone does what is right in his own, not right in his own eyes, but everyone does as he sees fit. He tries to reach out to God by his own way. And Moses is going to say, that ends now in Deuteronomy chapter 12. No longer will that happen. Giving you a clue there to when day 2 ends, but we'll get back to that in a minute. Lastly, so they Men called on the name of the Lord, trying to reach God. They offered sacrifices. The smoke ascends to God because of the separation. The men built a tower to try to reach to God. In Genesis chapter 12, we read of Genesis 11, we read of the Tower of Babel or Babel. Let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens. They want to build a tower up to where God is. Now, obviously, if the sun, moon, and stars are in that space, that's not going to happen. But that's what men are trying to do. And we look at Melchizedek. When Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, he was priest of God Most High. During this period of time, God is known as God Most High, and that's a name that's not used very often. The psalmists use it, but other than that, it's not very often. Isaac uses it once. Isaiah uses it once when talking about Satan wanting to ascend above the Most High, and I think Lamentations refers to it also. But otherwise, it's a psalm word, not a narrative word, except in this part of the Bible where men are priests of God Most High, when men are calling out to God Most High because he's separated from men. Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. And what do the Israelites say to Moses? Or what does Moses say to God? Like, when they ask me who sent me, who am I going to say sent me? You are separated, and your name is not even known to your people. Your name is not even known to your people, and to the people you're going to choose. What am I going to tell them? I don't know your name. You're God Most High. I don't know what to tell the people. So there's this tremendous separation. They don't know his name. They search, they call on him. Their sacrifices ascend, and those who are his priests are priests of just God Most High. So this period of time is characterized by the separation of God from man. The waters above are separated from the waters below. Now we have to find an end to this day. Now, if you look at look up the word dispensation in the on Wikipedia or something, you'll see that there's a number of lists and a number of options. We could just end with there's certain things that are characteristic of that change in the history of the Bible. For instance, when Noah comes off the ark, that's the command is given to him to take the life of a man who kills another man. That if someone takes a human life, they're to be put to death. And Daniel will say, since the beginning of nations, it's in Daniel 12:1, and we take that to mean that when there was a time when nations began, and we would assume that that's referring to Noah, when the covenant God gives with Noah and this command he gives Noah for men to take the life of someone who's a murderer. That's the beginning of this government, the beginning of the nations. That's one possibility for the end of this period of time when nations began. Another one is the scattering at the Tower of Babel, when languages come into. So we have all these separations into different people groups, different ethnic groups are now show up, and they're separated by language. There's a different end of something and a beginning of something else. Before that, there was one language. Now there's thousands of languages. I'm not sure how many there are. You have to ask a linguist on that one. Then Abraham, God calls one man out. He's going to make a people, and he makes a covenant with Abraham and calls him and is going to give him a seed, going to give him a promise, give him the land. So that's the end of something and the beginning of something new. Is that a new house of rules, or is it just something else? It's a possibility. Moses comes out, takes the Israelites out. They come to Mount Sinai, and then there's the 10 Commandments, and the people of God go into the land of Israel. Well, we come to David. David is the beginning of the kingship. God makes a covenant with David to give him the kingship forever. That's the beginning of something new, a kingship that's going to last forever. And there's going to be a king, a descendant of David, who's going to reign on that throne forever. The building of the temple under Solomon, the temple where God said he would inhabit, the place where everyone was to come to worship, that all nations were to come to worship. Then it's the destruction of the temple under Nebuchadnezzar in the time of Zechariah the king. The temple's destroyed. And Jesus will make the statement in Luke 21:24, the Gentiles will trample on Jerusalem until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So we would take that as that Jerusalem was trampled underfoot by Nebuchadnezzar, and that began the time of the Gentiles. As we see in Daniel, that he's dealing with these Gentile kingdoms out of these beasts out of the sea, the Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, and then the Medes and the Persians, and then the Greeks and the Alexander, the shaggy goat, and then the four kings after him, and then finally this fourth kingdom that just destroys the earth. That he's working from the time of Nebuchadnezzar. He's dealing with the Gentile nations, and he still has a plan for Israel, still has a purpose for Israel. But the times of the Gentiles, Jesus said, that Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot. And essentially, from the time of Nebuchadnezzar until until Christ comes back again, Jerusalem is trampled underfoot. So if we take these list of items, where do we divide this second day? Where does it end? And so my thought was, as I was thinking about this, how many years ago, when I think, how many dispensations are there? The question I asked was, where does God say there's a difference in the way he's dealing with men? Where do the house of rules change between the fall and Jesus? We have two ages, and there's got to be a divide between them. Where do we find that difference in the house of rules? And the answer, I think, is in Romans. It's in Romans chapter 5. And starting after God's great promise to us of, or a great statement about how God loved us. You'll see at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous man, though for a good man, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. It's a great passage, one of the greatest ones in the Bible. And we are enemies of God, and he died for us. But right after that, he tells us this theologically important point. And starting in verse 12, I skipped a few in there, but down to verse 12. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man. Okay, that's easy to understand. Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve take the fruit. When Adam eats, he's disobeying God's command. When Eve eats, she sins, but sin enters the world through Adam as the representative head. When sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin. In this way, death came to all men because all sinned. For before the law was given, sin was in the world. That means before the law, sin was in the world. But sin is not taken into account where there's no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, even over those who did not sin by breaking a command, as did Adam, who was the pattern of one to come. Very simple. He says there's sin in the world, but there's not breaking of commands. So until the time of Moses, no one's sinning by breaking a command. They're sinning, and there's death. It's very clear. But the sin is not counted on a book saying, hey, look, you didn't do this. You committed adultery. You blasphemed. You lied. You coveted. You disobeyed your parents. You didn't keep the Sabbath day holy. There's a list that Moses gets, and he gives to the people. That's the law. And you can look at the law and say, I broke it, I broke it, I broke it, I broke it. And that's what every man has to say when he comes to the law. Before that, death was in the world and sin was in the world, but it wasn't reckoned. It wasn't counted according to the law. So here he tells me that there's a different house of rules prior to Moses, because there's no law. There's no list of laws that man can break. There is sin, there is death, but it's not the same way as it is after the law. And Paul will go on for the next 2 chapters to talk about how the law just proved him to be a sinner. He couldn't get away from the fact that he looks at the law and he finds himself to be a sinner. And that's what the purpose of the law was, Paul will say, is to show man their sin. It doesn't show us how to live a holy life. It shows us that we're sinners. That's the fundamental, basic purpose of the law. So there's an age, a house of rules, where men are separated from God and they call on him. Then there's going to be an end to that age. There's going to be a theological difference when Moses comes on the scene. When Moses comes, there's a theological difference prior to and afterwards. And that's what it says very simply here. There's a different set of rules. God's dealing with mankind differently. And day 2 tells us in this age, the second age, from the time of the fall, which is clearly no longer the first age, till the time of Moses, people don't sin by breaking a command. They're separated from God, and they call on God Most High. Their sacrifices ascend. That's the characteristic of that age, is that men are separated by this great, infinite distance from God, and they can't reach across it. They don't even know God's name. And that day is going to change. the third day is coming. So make sure I go through the rest of my notes here. Yeah, day 2, we'll call it the age of conscience, because Adam and Eve have a conscience. When they sin, they recognize evil. They recognize sin. They recognize what's wrong, even though they don't sin by breaking a command. So here's my little day 2 sticker, and we've got the Bible here. So I flip to Genesis chapter 3. You could split hairs. I'm not sure I can tell you, as Evan would say, I don't want to slice the bologna too thin, but too thinly. My mom was an English teacher. But I'm going to put it on Genesis 3. You can decide if it's Genesis 3:1 or if it's Genesis 3. So there's Genesis 3. I can't really put it down here in the middle, but sorry, Genesis 3. And Genesis 3:6, we clearly have the sin of Adam and Eve, and so we can use that as our dividing line. So here we have day 1 starts in Genesis 1. Day 2 starts in Genesis 3:6. Day 7, sorry, moving that upside down. Day 4 starts in Matthew chapter 1. And day 7, the last day, starts in Revelation 21. So we got 4 of the days. We got 3 more stickers to place. And to me, the fact that they're exactly going to be in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, they kind of spread out on my top of my book here, but they're going to go through the Bible. We look at the 7 days of creation. We look at 7 ages, 7 houses of rules, and they're in order. And the key items of that age are described by what God created on that day. To me, that's just fundamentally, it's amazing, I guess, that God would stamp on the first page of the Bible exactly what he was going to do through all history. None of this took God by surprise. God never had one plan and said, "Oh, that didn't work. I guess I'll come up with another one." And the judges didn't work. I guess I'll give them a king. Oh, the kings didn't work. I guess I'll throw them out of Israel. Oh, that didn't work. They came back. No, I guess I'll send my son. Oh, that didn't work. I guess I'll start a church, and that maybe I'll do Israel again, and whatever. It's not God trying to figure out a plan. God had a plan. He said, "This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you." And none of this happened by chance. God working through the day by day, plays age by age to bring men to salvation. God is working. My Father is at work to this very day. I too am working. God will rest on the 7th day. Until then, he works out his faithful plan that he articulated on page 1 of Genesis, that there'd be 7 ages, 7 houses of rules, and it would end with the eternal rest of God and of man. Well, that's day 3. I can see my little chart here. So a few extra little notes on it, but you can fill in day 2. Sorry, day 2. The sky was created, the expanse, the heavens. But you could put the sky, this outer space, whatever you want. And it's the age of conscience, and the heavens. God is separated from man. God's above, man's below. Man can't reach him. And it starts. I put Genesis 3:1 on that page, but you can put Genesis 3:6, whichever you want. Again, I don't want to slice the bologna too thinly. So that's day 2. We'll get on next week. We'll look at day 3. Not that hard to figure out here. Day 2 is the before the law, and day 4 is when Jesus comes. You can't catch day 3, but what is it that's pictured in Genesis there on the 3rd day of creation that shows us so clearly that it's referring to this 3rd age? And we'll look at that in detail next week. So, Lord be with you, and let's just close in prayer. Father, I thank you for this short time we could have just to look at your word. I pray there be a blessing to those that listen and those who hear might understand that you knew exactly what was going to happen through all eternity, that you have a plan, you're carrying it out, and we can look and see what the next things that are going to happen are. And we can just be amazed and long for that day of eternal rest when we'll be with you forever in heaven. There'll be no more crying or mourning or pain. The old order of things will have passed away. And we look forward to that time. For all eternity, we will spend with you, and without sin. And without sin in us, and the righteousness, we'll have only the righteousness of your Son in him. We thank you for that in Jesus' name. Amen.